Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the iesa Vision Summit 2021 keynote from me. I'd firstly like to start by thanking Rajiv, Vivek, and the rest of the iesa team, and Sharda and her team for some fantastic organization. It's a real pleasure to be at the event. As with most of you, we normally turn up to the Leela in Bangalore, but obviously for the reasons we all know, we're all meeting on a virtual platform, but I'm sure it's a absolutely great event with the curtain riser today and the rest of the event for the next couple of days. So I won't take a lot of time. I'll just quickly share my screen and start by sharing some thoughts of mine. When Vivek and Rajiv asked, they asked me to talk a lot more about myself, about Secure as a company, but that's something that I'm not going to really be doing a lot of. But I do want to talk to you guys a lot about what are some potential opportunities for growth. So just a quick 30 seconds about us. We are an Indian company based out of Udaipur and been going for 33, 34 years. We do all our own R&D, sales, and manufacturing. And today we, because of the hard work that the team has put in over the last 34 years, have got a global footprint with some very loyal customers in a lot of countries. And, it takes time, but I can tell you it's definitely worth doing. So I'm going to start by giving a slightly contrarian view. I think we all know and understand how IT companies have grown in the past. We all know and understand how industrial companies have grown in the future. But I think the coronavirus pandemic and the changes that have happened in the economics scenario since then have given us a different competitive advantage as companies, as Indian companies, which are wanting to service the world's demand. Geopolitics also has a role to play in it, but that is not something that we can control. So, as I'm talking to you guys, you're all part of the Indian Electronic and Semiconductor Association. So what is very clear is Indian engineering is still valued massively around the world. I would say a vast number of chips that are manufactured are actually designed in India. Most of the big companies have got design houses in India. And I've always maintained that actually our competitive advantage is not to try and fight with the really high volume China, Vietnam, Thailand, but to focus on a slightly different segment of all products that is needed. You might not be making a million or one product, but you might be making a million pieces which are comprised of 5 different SKUs. And that is really where India's major competitive advantage exists. And I think that's something that we have sort of left unexploited and we should work in. Along with that, our IT industry is known for solutions and is known for end-to-end systems. And here we clearly have a competitive advantage and have shown that over many years. And I think this is where the drivers for the engines for growth in India are the SMEs, but also the SMEs have some competitive weaknesses, not as a consequence of the country, but as a consequence of their history and where they want to go in order to break the next orbit. And I think if you tie all of these areas up together, then there are some, the chess pieces are well placed on the board in order to make sure that we can really springboard from this platform that we've got and this opportunity we've got post-corona. So I'm just going to focus on a few areas that obviously I know a little bit better about and give you my perspective of where some of the avenues for growth in India could come. I think the industrial segment, the manufacturing segment has a huge role to play. And while I talk about consistent quality and improved throughput, there is also a very disorganized and semi-organized sector for service delivery, after-sale service delivery in the capital equipment sector. And I think that's also an arena that we as a collaborative could play a huge amount, we could do a huge amount of work in. Energy utilities, I think this is going to be a huge avenue for growth, not only in India, but taking the Indian technology and providing it outside, because I think our systems are a little bit more malleable when it comes to driving the change. And if we can provide that of a platform and that proof that what we're doing works in a country like India, which has got a very sophisticated grid and a sophisticated distribution network, then we could easily take that to the rest of the world. And lastly, an area which I don't know very well, but from what I hear other colleagues and other peers say, that when it comes to the process industry and small and medium enterprises in the process industry particularly, there is a huge amount of value to be had by increasing their throughput, giving them the ability to create more products and sort of move forward. I've steered away from the big words like Industry 4.0 and Industry 5.0 in here because for me, the big cause, the big driver for change, and the engine growth for India is actually moving the small and medium enterprises all up to the next orbit or the orbit after that. And I feel that uh, those particular companies, those particular management teams, they have quite a way to go before we can start talking to them about things like Industry 4.0 and Industry 5.0. But I think together we can enable them to create those systems which they can happily run and transform. So if I just talk about a typical industrial SME, um, you'll all know you all have very sound, robust customers which are of this nature. And I think where they struggle is they're very much about today. They have to keep that business running. They have to keep moving forward step by step, and it becomes quite a big challenge for them in order to stay on board because they've got very small, inexperienced teams, and they really don't understand how they can go from orbit one to orbit two, and sometimes from orbit one to orbit three. So it's a big challenge for them. Uh, Even though there is a great desire to do it, there are a lot of inhibitors. There is a lot of ballast which does not allow them to break through and make that change. And I think this is where we as an industry can help them. A lot of you will have customers that fit this bill that you can describe. And I can give you a few examples of what we did with our suppliers and how that really helped them transform and move to the next step. So, and hopefully this is where a lot of you can start to help and use more than just your products and your technology to create those customers that are able to grow and break through to the next orbit and go global, because that's where the real value for you comes. So I'll give you two examples of what we did. Some of our suppliers didn't have a master MPS or an MRP solution. And what we found was obviously that used to cause us an impact because they weren't necessarily able to plan their material and their production teams well. But what we did was we deployed some of our resource, we deployed some of our people, and we created simple Excel-based MPS and MRP solutions for them and help them deploy them in their business, because creating a tool is a very easy thing, but trying to get their team to understand how the systems would work and what data was needed, how orders would need to be input, how stock would need to be controlled, because these were all things which they did not have previously. And what that's allowed them to do is that it's allowed the promoters, it's allowed the owners of those businesses to think about where to move next. And I think particularly now, given the implementation of the GST network and how the financial data has to be very well controlled and has to be clean, is a big opportunity for all of us to work with SMEs that we know as customers or as customers in order to create this platform for them, which allows the core of their business to have a very strong foundation. Secondly, I think one of the big areas, given the world's desire to move to net zero and the national determined contributions that each country has after signing the Paris Agreement and the Katowice implementation, it is absolutely critical that all small and medium enterprises provide to this NDC. Because if everybody doesn't provide to the NDC, then that what has been enshrined in law will not be possible to achieve. And the reality is that energy efficiency is such a low priority event for all SME owners, because they've got so much more that is going on that they find it very difficult to move into this space. And again, I think the big companies, the Honeywells, the Rockwells, the Schneiders of the world, have very good solutions for large corporations or even medium to large corporations, But if in India we can develop components, we can develop systems which allow all small and medium enterprises worldwide to do energy efficiency easily, it will save them a huge amount of cost, and it will also allow us as Indian companies to provide a solution to the world which doesn't exist. It might appear like a niche solution, but the reality is that there are many, many small and medium businesses in the world, and this could be a huge avenue for us as a collaborative to provide different parts of the solution and take it forward. And maybe this is something that some of the customers of the IESA, the members of the IESA, would like to take forward. Lastly, I think a couple of points around metering, because that's what we know best. It's secure. System optimization and asset planning on medium voltage and low voltage networks is going to be a big problem going forward. I don't need to inform the people here about the addition of electric vehicles onto the low voltage networks, or the creation of rent-a-roof solar type of work that's going to happen all around the world. Everybody understands that this is a problem, but very few people have been able to try and find a fix for it. And I think this is where, again, we in India can do a very, very sensible, very cost-effective solution, which can allow these networks to be monitored in almost real time, and then give the network operators, all the system operators, as the transition moves forward, a way of analyzing the network without using could be working on and create for India. I think it would be remiss for me not to talk about the hot topic in India, which is how smart metering can be deployed and what smart metering can do to the utilities of India specifically, and also the utilities of the world. So, there has been a lot of talk about smart metering, and I think a lot of deployments are happening now. The government has put in place some very sensible policies, which mean that we are going to move forward. But the core thing with a utility company, if you look at the circle on the left, in amongst the regulatory compliance, they basically have to do 8 core processes in order to remain effective customer service agents and provide an efficient service as well. It could be simple things like forecasting what your demand should be and therefore what your supply side buying agreement should be, or simple change of tenancy. Somebody moves into a house, their bill needs to be cleared. Somebody moves out of that house, the two things need to marry up. It seems really simple, but the reality is that the core of all of these 8 processes is actually on information that the meters generate. And until we think of smart metering as a manner of changing the system that's providing the information, changing the business process flows, and changing the people responsible, then it's going to be very, very difficult to make smart metering a success. And we look forward to the government policies. But what we are also doing is working with our customers and ensuring that they can work these 8 processes in the most cost-effective fashion in order to, 1, provide a better quality service, and 2, reduce their cost to serve. I think if we can do that, then there is chance that the demand for smart metering will scale on a consistent basis. Otherwise, this program might have a stop-start nature, and that's not going to be good for anybody that's involved in this program. Lastly, I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes on what the electronics sector in India needs. I think there's a huge number of enablers now. The systems that the government has put in place, whether they be for import-export, whether they be for GST, have become a lot easier. And right now, like I said, because of Corona and where the future is, there are going to be a large number of opportunities for Indian companies in India and outside India, and also for a lot of companies from outside India to come into India. But I think at the same time, for electronics in particular, there are some large fundamental weaknesses, which mean that the foundation is actually quite weak on which to scale. And what I sort of request here with everybody is, how can we put our minds together to create a much better foundation and move that forwards? I think, we all understand that there is no depth in the electronic supply chain. All electronics manufacturers rely very heavily on bringing material from outside India of all kinds. And unfortunately, this is a bit of a chicken and egg story. When you talk to people who manufacture components, they all don't see the demand as such in India. They don't see the true potential of India because we haven't been able to deliver as a country going forward. And as a consequence, they didn't put in the supply side capabilities that we need. I think my push here would be to say that we are very, very well placed right now for an exponential growth going forward in India. And I would really urge everybody who's involved in the electronics and semiconductor field around the world to think of India as a serious investment step going forwards. I don't think, while we need to work on foundries and all the work that the government's doing, I think that's very much for the next 15 to 20 years. I think as a skill set and where we want to grow as a country and what we want to do, maybe we do some things which are slightly simpler than that. We don't have a global scale PCB manufacturing facility in India. This hasn't been competitive in the past because we don't have the laminate supply, the pre-preg supply available. I think if we focus on that, then get some companies in who are looking for that next expansion and ask them to do that expansion in India, then that really puts in a huge amount of momentum into the flywheel. Similarly, with component manufacturing, I think, Passives, Vishesh has shown for many years that they can do that in Loni. I don't think we need to go down to wafers and dies right now. If we focus on simple things like lead frame assemblies and ATMP, then what it will do is provide a huge boost. It will get in a whole bunch of DCs into the country, which will again allow a lot of momentum to go into the field. And lastly, something I put in because I think it works with that competitive advantages, but I don't necessarily understand this industry very well. That's talking about the equipments and processes that are used to build components. So, it could be the test and manufacturing machine, or it could be something that goes into a semiconductor fab. I think this is also an area that we could play a huge role in. And, hopefully that will give us new ways forward. So thank you so much for your time and for listening to me. Really enjoyed this. And once again, thanks a lot for to the iesa team.
Thank you, Suket, for that excellent insight. I think touched on very, very important points of how an SME can grow and become a global supplier, a global company. You have proved it by example. I have a couple of questions for you. I think it'd be interesting to understand how did you secure your first 100 or maybe even the first 10 customers?
Hi, Sharda. Just a lot of hard work. It was, electronic metering was new to the world and didn't exist. And we just had to do the hard work, focus on customer segments, understand who was likely to pay. And in fact, India was the vanguard. Electronic metering started because India was the first country in the world to adopt it. But it just takes time, perseverance, and tenacity.
So you make an interesting point, right? A lot of times companies think about, it's all about the idea, it's about the product. But I think I heard you several times through your talk about the systems, the framework, the process, hard work, tenacity. These are very important traits, I think, that, smaller companies should keep front and center from everything I heard from you, right?
Yeah, I think, always you need a product or you need an idea behind which you put everything. But the reality is that customers need a lot more. And I think, like the previous speaker said, even in the capital equipment space, you got to think of servicing, you got to think of customer support. And once you start to put it all together, that's when you come out with a good all-round picture for your customers. And ultimately, competitive advantage isn't built just on product alone or just on cost alone. Even customer service, technical support, a number of different things can be very, very important competitive advantages. And this is where we stand out in India. We don't have to fight for pennies and pesas with the Chinese or with the Vietnamese or the Thailand factories. We can stand out in some very key areas and provide solutions for which our customers are beating a path to our door, not to any other door.
Right. And then we have so much consumption that's possible right here, right? the classic 99 perspiration and 1% inspiration type of story, I guess. Okay,
Absolutely.
let me move on to another question. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we can overcome some of the SMEs disabilities, things like access to seed capital, access to markets, maybe because ownership of design has led to a lot of dependence on foreign partners. Things like this, right? Do you have any suggestions and thoughts on how we can overcome such disabilities for the SMEs?
Look, I think there isn't a single answer to this because there is such a huge diversity of SMEs that we've got. I think access to capital now is not an issue in India. Good long-term capital is available. Are willing to put in take quite big risks on capital as well. Access to markets, yes, is a bit of a challenge, but again, the typical barriers that we used to have 15, 20 years ago have disappeared. India really has credibility in the global markets. India is known for good technical products, good support. And I think it's just a question of, sometimes it's a cultural understanding. And this is again where a lot of things happen as customer supplier relationships. But if we start thinking of them as actually collaborations, then if you've got an American semiconductor company or a European electronics company or somebody who's got an SME customer but is not able to break into those markets, then sometimes just sitting with them and explaining to them how sales cycles work, how because a Swiss customer thinks very differently to a German customer to a French customer. That's again where a lot of collaboration can happen because these guys are not going to get the ability to learn those aspects of business as quickly as they need to. So I think it's just about being open and realizing that as a supplier, there might be many things you can do for your customer, which is more than selling a product at a good price.
So I think you're like a little bit into the thought of being interdependent a little bit, the collaboration part where you say there's a need to be interdependent, right? There's things we can do and there's things somebody else can do for us. So that's really. So I think on that note, Mr. Suket, I think we can end this session and thank you so much. I'd really like to thank you, especially because I know you just landed in India and you came, right to this session. Really appreciate your commitment and support of our iesa and the Vision Summit. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sharda. It was wonderful. Thank you very much.
So we are now ready to, I think, draw the curtain on day 2 of the curtain riser. We had an interesting evening with starting with some panel discussions. And if you notice, the theme around most of it was, the ecosystem. We talked about supply chain ecosystem. We talked about the manufacturing ecosystem. We talked about how to bring up, the SMEs. And we had a wide array of stalwarts from the industry that gave us some very deep insights into all of these. I think combination of industry initiatives where I think you would have noted that some of the more experienced industry stalwarts are already reaching out to both startups, to SMEs. Mr. Suket gave us an example of how they went down to even sharing frameworks and other such things to help these SMEs. I think a combination of these combined with the government initiatives is probably what will help us, really go forward in this decade, the defining decade as the theme of this conference is today. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for being with us this evening, and we look forward to the inaugural session tomorrow morning. Thank you.